Welcome to this session. Today in this session we are going to discuss about very important aspect, that is education and social mobility. In this particular session we are going to focus about that what do we understand by social mobility. You will also get to know the different types of social mobility and the factors that affect social mobility. And towards the end of the session we will discuss the relationship between social mobility and education. We all are social beings and we live in a society which is hierarchically arranged. When I say it is hierarchically arranged, it means that there are social groups and social classes which are arranged in a particular manner in a particular hierarchy. Now, when these groups which are arranged in a particular hierarchy, when an individual moves from one group to the other, that is known as social movement or social mobility. But having said that there is always a continuous movement of individual from one stratum to the other stratum, but that is dependent upon many factors. We will also understand what are those factors which impacts the social mobility of the individual. This particular term of social mobility was first time given by a very famous sociologist known as Sorokin in his book, which is Social and Cultural Mobility. He says no society is open to mobility and no society is closed to mobility, which means that whenever or in every society the social mobility takes place, but in some society it is little fast, while in others it is little slower. Also, when they discuss about what social mobility is, there are various definitions which comes forward. One very famous description about social mobility was given by Wallace and Wallace. It says that it is the movement of individual or the group of individual from one social status to another. So here importance is that it is just not the mobility of within a group can be of an individual and it can be of the entire group. So they can move from one social status to another, maybe a lower educational status to the higher educational status, maybe from the middle economic status to the higher economic status, right? So there is a movement of the individual from one status to the another. Also, when Scott says that this is just not the movement or in the social status, it is also the movement of individual from one social position or one particular class to another. That is from, when an individual moves from a lower socioeconomic status to the higher economic status, or when an individual moves from a poor status to the richer status, this change from one level to another is known as social mobility. Now, social mobility is basically normally recognized in society through various statuses which an individual occupies in a particular society. So therefore, when we talk about society, we know that society is not static, it is dynamic in nature. So there are constant changes which keeps on happening, and those have an impact on the social status of an individual. So when you talk about social mobility, so this impact of the dynamic nature of the society, right, it has an impact even on the status of the individual. And when you talk about mobility, the mobility can either be higher or maybe even lower. That means the people can move from low to higher status, and they can even come down to from upper to lower status. So it can be either higher or lower. So therefore the social mobility can be good or bad. Having said that, it is a phenomena which is which takes place in the society, and whenever the social mobility takes place, there is a change which happens in the social structure of the society, and there is a change which happens in the social order of the society. So therefore, even social mobility is the product of that, can be seen as a product of the social change, or it can bring about a social change. So there is a direct relationship between social mobility and social change. Let us move forward in our understanding about that what are the different types of social mobilities which we can find in the society. See, the first type which you can find in the society is the vertical versus horizontal social mobility. As the name suggests, vertical means that movement of individual or the group of individual from one status to another, right. But again, as I said, this vertical nature could be even from higher to low and low to high. So when an individual, when the movement of the individual or the group of individual, it takes place from the higher to the lower, it means there is a social decline which takes place. Whereas when individual moves from the lower strata to the upper strata, there is a positive change which takes place. So this vertical mobility can happen in both the directions, and because it happens in both the directions, therefore whatever changes it brings in not only in the change in the class, the occupation, but also in the power positions. How? For example, when an individual is promoted from, say, a team leader to a position of a manager, now the role changes. Now when a person becomes the manager, there is more power which has been assigned to that individual. When the power comes, then what happens? The social relationship between that particular groups also changes. So therefore mobility will have impact on the power positions, and power positions will also bringing changes in the social structures and even in the social interactions. When you talk about horizontal mobility is nothing but change in position but without the change in status. That means the person is moving to an equivalent status or equivalent position. Let me give you an example. When a practicing doctor moves from her clinic to a teaching position, so the position is not changing, the individual remains a doctor, but now but it has changed in the terms of that earlier the individual was practicing and now the individual is teaching. So this is the change, but this is at the same level, whereas in vertical mobility the change is seen at the different level. That is the difference. This is first type of mobility which we see in our societies. Another type of mobility which you can observe is the upward and the downward mobility. When you talk about upward mobility, as the name suggests, it denotes the social improvements. That means the person from the lower social position acquires the higher social position or the status. It is also known as upward mobility. It is very different from vertical mobility, because vertical mobility, there it can be both the ways. It can be from high to low and low to high. But here in the upward mobility, the direction is only upward, that is from lower to high. Whereas when you talk about downward mobility, it is just opposite to when upward mobility, that is that the person moves down in the social ladder. So there is a social failure. When individuals who do not maintain, they are not able to maintain their social, political or economic positions, and they lose their social status, that is known as downward mobility. And this downward mobility could be the result of Maybe, for example, if an individual becomes bankrupt, the economic condition deteriorates. So, the person comes down in the level of social hierarchy. So, this is known as downward mobility. There are various reasons for upward and downward mobilities. Now, another type of social mobility which you can observe in the society is the intergenerational and the intragenerational social mobility. When you talk about intergenerational mobility, social mobility, it is basically change in the status of the family member from one generation to another. You must have heard of so many examples in your life that a son of a rickshaw puller becoming an IAS officer. So, what is happening? The status of the society changes from this previous generation to the next generation. This is known as intergenerational social mobility. When you talk about intergenerational social mobility, it is basically the change in the social status which comes for an individual within person's own adult career, which means that a person joins a university, say as assistant professor, and then went on becoming a professor in the university. So, that change the person has seen within own career. So, this is known as intergenerational social mobility. But whichever form of social mobility you look into, one thing is sure, that whenever the social mobility is happening, you can see the change in the status of the particular group or of a particular individual. But having said that, whenever you will look at any type of social mobility, the major factors which play important role in bringing about social mobilities, that has to be also understood. So, let us now understand the factors which are responsible for bringing about social mobility in the society. The first factor is the motivation. If an individual is motivated to uplift his own standing in the society, then the individual will work hard and eventually the individual will make change in the placement of that particular individual in a particular social ladder. So, therefore, that consistent motivation is the key factor for maintaining the social mobility of the individual. Another important factor is the education. Education is something which not only provides us knowledge and understanding about the world and the society, it also helps us in acquiring major positions, and it also helps us in understanding the society as a whole. So, therefore, education is a powerful agent which can bring in the social mobility of the individual. Another is providing them appropriate skills and training. When the individual has got skills which can be used by the society, when the individual is properly trained so that his training can be used in the society, then skilled individuals are the asset to the society. Any skilled individual can bring in the changes desired for. Another important factor which plays an important role is the migration. When people migrate because of getting better jobs, when they migrate because of any kind of natural calamity, they have to leave their belongings back home. So, what happens when they migrate? Sometimes whatever social status they have maintained earlier, it may lower down, because the flood might have taken away all the belongings which they have had. So, they had to migrate from that particular native land to another foreign land, and because of that, at some particular time their their the social mobility, meaning there is a downward social mobility which they experience, but that does not mean that they cannot move upward in the society with appropriate education, with appropriate skills and training. Of course, this migratory population can also move up in the ladder of the social structure. Another important aspect is the industrialization. When the industrialization happened, what happens is that there were, we can see many automatic machines coming in. Because of that, there is lot more sophistication which has come out in the terms of products. So now the sellability of the product has increased, which are now yielding better prices to the people, those who are involved in the industries. Because of that, they have improved upon in terms of their economy. When they get better prices, they improve in terms of their economy, and when they improve in the terms of economy, they jump in the social status from low to high. So this is also one factor which plays an important role in bringing about the social mobility in the society. So which means that the social mobility is one process which takes place in the society, which is impacted by so many factors. So having said that, when an individual moves from one status to the other, it is just not one factor which is responsible for this movement. There could be multiple factors which may help in moving the individual from one ladder to another. So whenever we talk about social mobility, the another one aspect which comes to our mind is that its close association with social change. So how they are both associated with each other, let us try and understand that. When you talk about social mobility, as we've been discussing, the change comes in terms of acquiring new position in the society. When the new position comes, when the individual moves from one level to another, what happens, their interaction with other society members, that also improves, that also increases. And because this changed pattern in the social interactions, they develop a new understanding which may bring in a social change. So therefore you can say that the social mobility can lead to social change. But another important aspect is that even social change can lead to social mobility, because social changes, they take place, the various factors which are responsible for making a social change. One of the factor, for example, is the environmental factor. So whenever natural calamity impacts the individual has to adapt to that change, and in that process of adaptation they may change their own habitat, and they may go to a foreign location, a different location, and adapt to the needs of that particular society. So within that change, what happens, they have to leave behind so many things at the back. So that social change which has been brought in by the change in the environment will eventually make a change in the position of an individual. So therefore both social mobility and social change, they are related to each other. Now having said that, how social mobility can be improved with education? Can education play a role in improving the social mobility? We have to look into this. Of course, when I say that education is a powerful agent, it can bring about any change in the individual. It does not only, the change is just not limited to the change in the perspectives and the knowledge of the individual, but education also brings in develops a lot of skills in the individual, through which they can contribute to the society. So education helps first of all in developing the ability and the capacity to gain higher status. How? Through education the individual gets individual becomes skillful, and the individual is trained, and because of this training and because of these skills the individual can acquire a good job in the society, which can improve individual's social status. So this is one aspect of education, that it can bring in the economic liberty of the individual. Another important aspect is that education, through education what happens, it actually helps the individual to work hard, because it helps in sustaining that motivation further. And when there is a high motivation, then individuals strive to make their own space better. And when individuals they try to make their own space better, of course they will try to attain a higher status in the society. So they will move from, they will try hard to change their particular, the status in which they are currently in. So this education can bring in that motivation to do hard work. Also, social efficiency also increases with the help of education. When I say social efficiency, what does that mean? Social efficiency means how to deal with the individuals, how to deal in groups, how to even deal with information. So education provides us an understanding that how to manage the things more effectively. And when we learn this skill of social efficiency, that what happens, that it will eventually lead to improving the social status. So and that will bring about the change in the the change in the structure, the overall structure of the placement of the individual in the society. So therefore, having said this important aspect of social mobility and the relationship between the education cannot be ignored. So therefore, it is important that correct education is provided to an individual, so that and at the same time the education, the type of education also must be related to the present demands of the society. Then only the education will help in improving the social mobility of the individual. With this, I think our understanding about social mobility improves, and with this I end this session. Thank you very much.